Our reading today is James chapter 3, verses 13 to chapter 4, verse 3, and 7 and 8. One of the things I've grown to appreciate about the book of James each time I read it is how straightforward and practical his instructions are to those who believe in Jesus. James in his letter doesn't address those who do not know God, but rather he's speaking to a large group of Christ followers who are struggling to live out what they believe. They're facing trials of many kinds, tests that seem to shake the foundations of their faith, and they find themselves turning in on one another. They are a people who are desperately in need of godly perspective and hard-hitting advice in a time where their faith is under fire and the community of faith feels fragmented. It's not unlike today. We too are faced with crises of many kinds. Today's news headlines reveal the state of our world and give a window into the state of our brokenness. The global pandemic is still a lived reality as many are experiencing sickness of the body and mind. People are navigating and feeling justified to make personal choices about whether to vaccinate or to wear masks and grapple with the choices that are made by others. And these choices impact the ways that we as a community of faith gather and continue in our worship and our spiritual rhythms. It's clear we're living in a time where, like the early Jewish believers, we're desperately in need of God and the wisdom of His Spirit. And as Christ followers, we may feel the weight and the struggle to live out what we believe and to stand firm in our personal and our collective faith. If James chapters 1 and 2 pointed to what we need as believers to grow in enduring faith, the kind of faith that Eugene Peterson describes as long obedience in the same direction, James 3 gives instruction for when that faith comes under attack and when the people of God are overwhelmed, particularly those who are called to teach and to lead. And as I read through this scripture, a few things stood out to me as important questions to reflect on. First, from verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? Those of you who are familiar with the book of James can remember his bold claim that faith without works is dead. James highlights the spiritual necessity of works and loving action in developing and living out our faith in God and sustaining a right relationship with Him. In the previous chapter, Abraham's faith and actions by offering his son Isaac on the altar was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. Rahab, who lived her life as a prostitute, was considered righteous in the eyes of God for what she did, giving lodging to spies and sending them off in safety. James says, as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. And this weighty perspective serves as a backdrop of our text. So again, verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by the deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. Wise people, particularly teachers and leadership in this text, but applicable to everyone, consistently make godly choices in life. And you will see it, not by what they say, but by the fruit of their lives, their deeds and how they behave, what they do. There's a marked difference that James articulates between merely giving lip service versus showing a life submission to the way of Jesus, a life that is marked by humility and resembles the heart and character of Christ Himself. Our lives are to be lived in a way that point people to Jesus, beyond the words we speak, but by the ways we show up and serve one another. Jesus says the same thing in Matthew 5:16. He says, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The second question that naturally comes from this text is, what's the difference between earthly wisdom and heavenly wisdom? And James points out these differences in three main ways. First, the source. Where does wisdom originate? Verses 15 and 17 describe two sources. Wisdom from heaven that starts in the heart and mind of God, a God who embodies sacrificial love, while earthly wisdom originates with the devil, who is described in John 10:10 as one who seeks to steal, kill, and destroy, an evil and pervasive force that works directly against the will and purpose of God. So what are the sources that you turn to in seeking wisdom in your life? Who are the voices that speak loudest in shaping who you are? Is it social media, your parents, perhaps someone in your church community? Paying attention to the source of the voice of wisdom helps us to discern whether it's from above or below. Second is the intent. What is the underlying motivation of wisdom from above and below? Verse 17 tells us godly wisdom communicates a concern for others through a pure and gentle, yielding, humble, and merciful spirit. Godly wisdom and grace allows us to move towards the person or situation out of love and concern, even when, and especially if, we disagree, and the other is undeserving of our love and our care. While verse 16 describes earthly wisdom as self-centered, revealing a bitter jealousy and a prideful, ambitious spirit. What intent do your actions say about you and what you're motivated by? Do they serve the best interests of others in your community? Or are they purely selfish and driven by comparison and appearances alone? Finally, a difference between earthly and heavenly wisdom is found in the result. James calls this the fruit or outcome of our lives. Verse 18, people who pursue godly wisdom are called peacemakers, who sow in peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. They're productive in their faith, and their way of life builds people up to pursue the glory and goodness of God together. While in contrast, verse 16 describes those who pursue the wisdom of the world as being confused and whose actions tear people down through evil intent. What are people's experiences of you? Does your life, your way of life, build people up? Do you stand for what's right in the face of injustice and inspire others to do the same? Or does your self-serving behavior bring confusion and disunity in your relationships and division in your community? Friends, in a time where the world and our lives seem uncertain and there are many threats to our sense of self and our purpose, James' words brings fresh encouragement to remember who we are and to whom we belong, and to stay the course of obedience when our faith is tested. We all have a choice, and our choices chart the course of our lives. Does your life indicate long obedience in the same direction? What does it mean for you today to live with godly wisdom in action more than with words? And as you think about these, may the Lord bless you and keep you in the week to come.